rising drug costs. And so we have a model that we're rolling out that's the enhanced medication therapy management model to encourage plans to look at total costs of care and not only drug costs. And so we tend to focus on what we can do rather than trying to synchronize across the entire government.
Importation.
In selected cases where there's a drug, that's a single source that's not available, maybe the manufacturing problem has obliviated the ability of domestic supply. So, in cases like that, certainly, maybe in the Shkreli case, where you have a 5,000% overnight increase. I'm certainly sympathetic to Matt's point. I'd support giving states more of the flexibility to design their own formularies and negotiate with companies like other private purchasers. But in the long run, you see, even in Europe, where the uptake in single payer systems of biosimilars is very, very different based on the purchasing of those strategies of those countries and how those countries allow or don't allow freedom at the patient or prescriber level. And so where you have more opportunity to have pricing competition, even in those systems, you see more rapid uptake of biosimilars. So competition at the level of marketplace is something I think we should be striving for rather than having a single formula for paying for medicines.
And importation and even compounding, the last thing you want to do on some of these busted generic categories is take away the incentive for generic manufacturers to enter these categories. And that's what you're going to do by allowing compounding or reimportation to these categories. You want to end that practice. You want to end the Shkreli's. You can come out with a regulation that defines what these categories are, and I think we could define it from a public health standpoint, and FDA could commit to approving a generic in that category in 3 months. We did it with the HIV medications under PEPFAR. We committed to 6 months. If you came out with a commitment like that from a policy standpoint, nobody would step in to try to take advantage of these arbitrages because they would know they would be sanded away in 6 months. So there are ways to solve this through policy. I wouldn't want to reduce incentives for generics to get into those markets, though.
All right, I'm going to open it up to the panel, and I'm going to ask Jerry to come to the stage and give him his very own seat on the stage. So it's not consistent with my views generally. I'm going to start on the right. Yes, and please identify yourself and make sure whatever you ask has a question mark at the end. And we'll do these things as quickly as we can.
I'm Dr. Caroline Poplin. I'm a primary care physician and an attorney. I'm not an economist. But my question is, a long time ago, pharmaceutical companies came and said they needed high prices because of the cost of developing a drug. Well, we're not talking about value, which suggests to me that, in fact, target should be not some general idea about value, but price equals marginal cost. That's where we're supposed to be, with more patients getting the drug for a lower cost. It's not the most profitable situation, but it is a profitable situation for a drug manufacturer. It's what you get in competitive markets.
Question?
The question is, why aren't we talking about cost and the relationship between cost and price instead of price and value?
I think one of the discussions we also have to entertain is the cost of capital in this industry. And I think in a lot of cases, you see things priced based on the cost of capital, and the cost of capital is inordinately high. You have to put up very big capital investments for prolonged periods of time, so there's a time cost of capital against a very low likelihood of success, depending on the segment. And I'll tell you, having looked at venture capitalists model these things out, they look at these relative to other investments they could be making, whether it's in IT or media or telecom, and when you put those models together and you look at the amount of money you're going to need to put up relative to the time it's going to take and the likelihood of success, a lot of times to make those models work and to be willing to make the investment, you need a high expected return. A high expected return is predicated on a high price because these are smaller and smaller populations of patients that we're seeking to treat. I know that's not how decisions get made universally. I know pharmaceutical companies have a different cost of capital, but when venture capitalists look at this and look at making investments in new biotech companies, that's how they're looking at it.
And when GAO and CBO have looked at this, they've said that once you adjust for the risk cost of capital, the returns to the industry don't seem to be out of line with other high-tech industries.
Question? Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Thanks. Carl Schmidt with the AIDS Institute. A couple of the speakers have spoken about the letter that CMS wrote to the states regarding hepatitis C. Unfortunately, since we haven't seen much movement by the states since that letter was written, even though the price have gone down significantly with increased competition And there is even every definition of your value, I think we see it, all the independent analysis. So I guess the question to Tim is, what are the next steps for the administration to do to compel states to cover these drugs for patients? And also to Matt, what is it going to take to get the states to do it? I mean, there was some protests last week to New York, and and then they had some movement. But should patients be having to protest, to get access to drugs that they should be given?
Tim?
No, we should be making them accessible and affordable, and they're still not. And as we do, I would dispute your assessment that things have not changed. Things are always changing. Things are becoming more open up. And I heard one state the other day say actually there is a new manufacturer for Hep C drugs coming onto the market soon, and that they're actually quite excited about that as being potentially the tipping point in the ability to pit now 3 manufacturers against one another, and that will be the key to bringing price down to a point where it becomes sustainable and affordable for a much larger number of people.
Tim?
Yeah, I mean, we're still tracking the issue, and we are talking to states and talking to NAMID and to other stakeholders in this, and so we are looking at it and trying to identify what the best next steps are. But we are hopeful that prices are going to continue to come down and that coverage can continue to expand. So stay tuned.
Question?
There's about 700,000 people who are on Medicaid with hepatitis C. If you take $40,000 and multiply $700,000, that's a big number. And so the question is, can the states afford that big number? So to go back to Carolyn's question, this is an issue of consumer surplus. And who essentially, if you can have a drug that really does a lot, is it the drug company that should get all of the consumer surplus? Should the Medicaid program get a lot of that? This is how we set the price. And right now, the Medicaid program has to pay it. And is that the long-run solution that we need to have?
Yes, John.
John Rother with the National Coalition on Healthcare. Much of this discussion is focused on launch prices. And while we all, I think, would agree that value is an appropriate way to deal with them, what about the year-to-year increases that are actually the major driver of increased cost in pharmaceuticals? When you have an appropriate launch price, then wouldn't a value basis require or suggest that that price should hold for a longer period of time instead of being increased by double digits every year on a compounded basis?
Jerry?
Well, the answer is if it's based upon value, yes. But if it's based upon the ability to pay, then no, because you're going to go for as much as you can get as a drug company in terms of ability to pay. So why not increase your price?
But if we have a value approach.
But we don't have a value approach. We talk about having a value approach. We have a cost-based approach. We have a whole series of approaches, but it's not like there is a single way that drugs are priced.
Scott?
I think in a market where you truly had pricing flexibility and you had the ability to price a drug lower based on an indication where it wasn't delivering as much value, you're also going to see settings where companies are going to take price increases where they might have new data demonstrating a substantial value that they didn't know about at launch. And I think what we're seeing with these sort of annual small price increases, I know they're not small, but these sort of annual predictable price increases is that we've set price regulation in a way that you can't sort of reset the price of a drug if you demonstrate substantial benefits. So we've conditioned people to try to take these small price increases year after year after year, and ASP certainly has done that. It's suboptimal. I think you want to price it to value, you want to price to what you're delivering. If that's the case, though, we're going to have to tolerate situations where a drug that comes onto the market that demonstrates maybe marginal benefit, but then goes on to demonstrate substantial benefit, is also going to take a big price increase.
In the back, gentlemen?
Thanks very much. John Graham, National Center for Policy Analysis and Health Technology Forum, D.C. My question is, I think Dr. Gottlieb alluded to it, and so did you, Professor Anderson. I've read a lot of articles that the gap between the list price and the transaction prices seems to be widening. Is that the case? Why? And is that the right way to go in terms of transparency? It doesn't seem like it. Thank you.
Jerry, Scott?
You want to go start?
Well, look, I don't know how it's sort of evolved over time in terms of whether it's widening. There is a very large gap, as you know, as everyone in this room knows, between the list price and the actual price in the market. And that also is suboptimal because a lot of patients are forced to pay the list price, especially those who are underinsured. So the most vulnerable patients are the ones paying the full price of the products because the discounts don't flow to everyone, and they don't. A lot of them get captured by middlemen. So it's a suboptimal system. But the list prices, as you know, are much higher. And I've seen some of these discussions in terms of how companies think about pricing, and they decide what they feel is a reasonable price, reasonable return to themselves. And then they have to set a price above that because of all the mandatory discounting in the market. So they have to set higher prices, higher list prices, to accommodate all of the mandatory discount.
So this is more of an issue in the generic market than it is in the brand market. And Matt, I thought he might jump in on this one because this is a serious problem for the Medicaid program, because they essentially say we're going to pay average wholesale price, which is effectively the list price, or the WAC price, which is effectively a list price, not the true price that's negotiated out. And they have to do it on the basis of formula. So the higher the list price, the more likely you are to sell that drug. So the whole system for Medicaid is totally messed up. It's a little bit different for VA, it's a little bit different, but Medicaid's really got a serious problem because of the way they set their price.
Yeah. Although clearly, whatever we pay, and clearly what we're paying on the front end is unreasonable and unrealistic, but there are back-end discounts. Although that does kind of get you into this complicated process where we're essentially paying a price and then we're getting a rebate. You can get a supplemental rebate. You get additional recalculations based on best price. There are disputes that happen all the time. And then we have to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out duplicate discounts with 340B. Quite frankly, it is a train wreck. And the pharmacy people in the Medicaid agency spend literally all of their time doing this and not doing things that would actually be of value. So there needs to be a much, much better way to do this.
The place where you don't see a lot of discounting is on some of the single-source biologics, the real specialty biologics. So that's some place to look where the sort of price reflects the actual price being paid. And what's interesting when you look there, it's a lot of times the pricing in Europe actually is higher than the pricing here. Those companies generally don't discount when they sell overseas.
Tim, you wanted to
I would
comment?
just second something Scott said earlier, that it is a problem that the list price, which is what patients pay at the pharmacy counter, is so divergent oftentimes from the actual price paid at the end of the day. And I think that it's reflected in Jerry's slides is the price of hepatitis C therapy, $40,000 to $100,000. That's a pretty wide range, and it's pretty incredible, but that for such an important product category, that's the range. I've heard it's even lower than that, so it could be, it's all over the place.
In the very back, the gentleman with his arm in the air.
My name's Steve Knievel. I work with Public Citizens Access to Medicines program. This question's more for Tim and Matt. There was a recent paper in, I believe, the Journal of American Medical Association from Professors Amy Kapczynski and Aaron Kesselheim of Yale Law School and Harvard Medical School, respectively. And they discussed the possibility and recommended the U.S. government take this action to pursue a sort of eminent domain equivalent for drugs, namely 28 U.S.C. 1498 is the statute. They're recommending the use of that to procure generic HCV drugs, which are available in other countries for less than $1,000 for a course of treatment, as opposed to $40,000 to $100,000 here. Has been discussed by the panel. Tim, Matt, do you have any comments, ideas about that proposal?
So again, and I think the issues around hepatitis C are unique enough for a lot of different reasons, including the number of people who have it, the cost of the drug, and the fact is, as Jerry pointed out, that the CDC and lots of other people are saying, with good reason, this is the #1 public health threat in this country. That makes this a very unique issue. Unlike all of the Shkreli stuff, unlike all of the specialty in the biologic, this is unique. We have advocated in a lengthy letter to the Hill a range of things that could be done that might include that. Personally, I don't care how much profit the manufacturers get for doing this. They've created a wonderful, wonderful product. We should encourage them to do so. What we are saying is that the Medicaid program, which is based on state general revenues, simply cannot absorb the hit of covering Hep C for 1 million. I think more like 1 million people than 700,000, but whatever. We can't do that. So something needs to be done. And we recommended a whole lot of things Congress could do, ranging from increase the federal match for this drug, or buy the supply chain and guarantee Gilead and AbbVie and Merck and whoever get as much profit as they want to give them. Just we can't do it. Something's got to be done. That could be one of them. Will it happen? I mean, I liken it to smallpox and polio. Those were legitimate national public health threats. We didn't, in those instances, just say, well, we've got a cure. Good luck figuring out how to pay for it for people. We had a national strategy, and we just don't have that here. We need one.
Tim gets the last comment.
All right, the very last comment. So on that question, it's an NIH authority. It's something they said they'll look at on a case-by-case basis, and I would refer you to a letter to Congressman, I believe it was Doggett, that they sent recently to lay out the specifics of our response.
I think you're confusing the margin proposal with what I'm talking about. Just something distinct.
Okay, happy to follow
We'll
up
catch
separately.
up. So let me thank all of you and turn it back to Billy.
And I think we should all thank the panelists, Tim, Scott, Paul. This is our third and final forum on this topic will be June the 16th. We'll focus on, with much trepidation after hearing the discussion up here today, about value-based approaches to funding and how they might apply to the payment system we have today. Thank you very much. And I'm supposed to say, Sheila reminded me, go Caps. That's it.